Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is a batch of blueberries that went bad, and I threw them in my freezer, but that was months ago. These things have been in my freezer for quite some time, and it's a pretty good amount of blueberries. It's a shame that they spoiled, but I guess my loss is the worm's gain. So try to guess which of my worm bins is going to be getting it. Round and around and around she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. Except me, of course, because I'm the one who makes the decision on who gets what. And it's going to be the 203-day-old bin in which I have the recruits from the outdoor compost barrel. When I had to repair my compost barrel, I bought in the material that was in it, separated all the worms, and we got that system running. I believe it's time to feed them now. 11 days since we last checked in. There was a 12-day interval between feedings last time. This time it's been 11 days since the last feeding. And it's a pretty capable bin. So I would not be surprised if there were very few leftovers in there. But we're going to get it up on the bench and see how it's coming along. I've been striving to extend the overall lifespan of the systems that I run. Because for some reason, I guess 150-day-old system to me in the past, it always seemed like kind of an old system and seemed like it would have been time to harvest around 150 days, 180 days, whatever. This system, just being a few days over 200 now, would have in the past seemed to me like oh my goodness, you know, let's get those worms out of there and move them and give them something fresh. But I guess there's been a slightly different thinking, which has been to try to run systems longer. I'm sorry, I'm just getting derailed here because I think what I'm observing is a whole bunch of dead worms here. That's definitely what we're observing, and things looked so good in this system last time. Such beautiful castings. I mean, I guess from the perspective of the castings being really beautiful was what I was referring to, how beautiful things looked. Now, things could have been quite the opposite and very, very far from being beautiful. And I guess a bunch of dead worms might be evidence of that. So I can't tell you why this is going on. Did I see some of these little guys move? Maybe I shouldn't dispose of these guys. Maybe it's just a matter of getting them down into some moist material or something. I'm not sure what happens when, you know, a worm gets old. Does it climb to the surface to die? I don't think so. I mean, if I think back to some of the time-lapse videos that I've created in the past, the worms just chug along until they stop doing so. And after they expire pretty much anywhere in the bin, they get, you know, mobbed by other inhabitants of the system to make use of those resources now that that worm no longer exists and no longer needs them. I think the main thing to be had is usually the moisture content of the expired worm. So, alright, I'm just going to try not to overreact to that. I mean, it's a little bit jarring when you come in and you see something like that, but hopefully it's, you know, limited to only that. So now we had fed down the middle, and we had found a good amount of leftover bedding from the previous feeding when we went really generous on bedding, but despite there being pretty good amounts of leftover bedding, we went ahead and applied even more. So my guess is we're going to bump into a good amount of it between some of the fresh stuff we applied last time combined with what was still in there as leftovers from the previous time. My bet is that we're going to find a good bit of material. I mean, it's kind of interesting, you know, the breakdown of worms just in this little sample that I unearthed. I mean, I could clearly see a couple larger sized worms here, maybe a couple more peeking out on the sides, but it almost seems to me like almost everything that I exposed here by digging down just a little bit was almost all little itsy bitsy worms, which is really neat. Yeah, I'm just hoping that little pile of dead worms that I started out with there in the beginning isn't a sign of some sort of bad thing going on. This was a pretty good sized piece of yummy veggie that we put in during the last feeding. It looks like I already managed to break it by accident. Thought it might be nice if we can keep it as a whole item. There too, you can really see how the worms are working it. I mean, this was like the cut off end of a spherical piece of vegetable. Pretty tough material that it's made of, at least in the fibrous parts that extend around. But the softer bits, the worms always chew that right out in the beginning, leaving a look at that. Ooh, wormies everywhere. They leave kind of the structure of it that surrounds the stem end, and they'll work it all down eventually. All right, a little bit more leftover bedding over here. You know, why don't we just let these little wormies settle down into the bedding here, and then I think we could start thinking about getting them set up with their next meal. Okay, I'll be back. I guess what you saw me doing there was sort of just blending in any of this bedding that I found with the neighboring materials, kind of like what I did last time. And there really wasn't quite as much of it as I thought. Some of these larger chunks that probably went in here as a whole piece of newspaper, like a whole quarter page of newspaper just crumbled up, are still in here. It's just the fragments of it that were sort of folded on top of itself, sort of protecting itself in a little bit of a ball. But if you spread this stuff out, give the worms access to all of its surfaces, then it doesn't stand a chance against the worms' onslaught of nibbling away. You know, I've got some dry stuff here that we collected off the surface. I'm inclined to get it down into the area where we're going to be feeding here, down the middle, and hopefully we also collected up some of those. I don't know if they were all dead. Some of them did seem like they were still squirming. Some of those worms we encountered in the beginning that didn't look too good. Some of them were clearly demised. Some of them looked like they might have still been hanging on. It's hard to tell. Yeah, last time there seemed to be such beautiful rich castings right out on the outer edges of the bin. And then as you made your way closer and closer to the center, you eventually hit the bedding and stuff that made up the feeding area. So I kind of like the idea of just pushing the leftovers outwards further and further, and kind of combining leftovers with the material in general, just so that it's all kind of floating out there all over the place for worms to have at it. Okay. It feels so good that the moisture in here just feels nice and cool and damp everywhere. Just the fact that there's worms throughout the material is probably a clear indicator of the fact that the bin's moisture level throughout is pretty decent. The worms seem to enjoy it. Man, I made a really big hole down here. I mean, I did want to add bedding, and I wasn't really intending to go terribly big. I felt like 2 feedings ago I did go very big. And then last time I think we even consciously held back a little bit. But, I feel bad. We sort of missed this bin's 200th birthday 3 days ago. So let's see if we can make up for it with a big birthday celebration feeding. They're getting all that yummy blueberry. So getting all that stuff mixed in here alongside all this awesome bedding that they're probably just going to enjoy equally as much as the food itself. Look at that. 2 big handfuls. That is a lot of bedding. I'm curious to see how the food looks when we stack it in, because this too is a good bit of food, that's for sure. This last batch of bedding that I prepared, this shredded paper and cardboard mixed with leaves and stuff, also gets mixed with a good bit of moisture, so this stuff is a lot more damp than usually is. So when I'm putting this stuff in, I do feel like I'm contributing to the bin's moisture. Not always. My bedding doesn't always have that level of moisture content that I feel that way, but this batch of bedding definitely feels like it's a good jolt of moisture too going in, along with the food. Yeah, I told you it was a good amount of yummy blueberries, right? My worm chow here is just pulverized whatever, anything I got. Sunflower seeds, bird seeds, throw some starch in here. Like I said, anything. And it just feels to me like a shame to go covering up with castings if I've got all this awesome bedding here. I'm not really looking to drive this system towards completion yet. I mean, this is only the system's 16th feeding. A little bit weird for a system that's over 200 days old. I must have really gone long periods of time between feedings in here. But this system's been burning through its feedings, so I didn't really want to go much longer. 11 days seemed about right. The 12-day interval last time seemed like it was enough for them to burn through their previous feeding, so 11-day interval between feedings this time seemed about right too. I'm going to put a little bit more of my worm chow inside of this bedding here. I think that's going to also contribute to them just coming by and pretty much eating all of it. It's really nice to see, you know, very few remaining bits of leftover bedding from the previous times when you know you've been really generous. Like I said, I think the main pieces that we saw leftovers of, here we go, more examples of it, just, you know, large chunks of paper that went in here whole and probably got crumbled up, making it more difficult for the worms to access all bits of it. So if we can lay it out, spread it out into the material so that they can really have at all of it, then I think that'll really help speed its breakdown. So I couldn't remember if we've looked in the outer edges of the bin. I think we did, but I just feel compelled to check again. This material is starting to kind of get this weird feeling to it where it feels like the castings start to get really, really fine. And I believe that might occur when the worms are actually re-eating their own castings. And then as that process repeats, I think the casting fineness gets finer and finer over time. Now, I'm not even sure if anybody can either confirm or correct that. I'm not even sure if I'm recalling that correctly or not, but I'm wondering if that's what I'm seeing here, if anyone else can sort of, just from observing it this way, tell me if they think it's a proper observation or not. Yeah, I'm not sure if we checked out here or not, but sometimes I just like to check in the sections that are not getting fed, because sometimes I'm not even sure if I checked there recently. I'm pretty sure we did last time, so I'm sure it's not an area that I've been neglecting, because I do remember admiring how really nice the castings were out there. So here and there I do want to try to blend in some of this leftover bedding. So I've put all the fresh stuff right by the fresh food, but all that leftover bedding that's been in here for some time, kind of like the idea of just spreading it out and, you know, letting the wormies throughout the bin have access to this stuff. Very nice bin. Alright, so let's bring back some of these coverings. We're going to cover up in the middle with our coffee filter. Shows us where we last fed. Nice little top covering. These top coverings are not really subject to a lot of worm traffic because everything's kind of dry out here with all these paper-only coverings, and I'm okay with that because the castings at this point are really holding their own as far as moisture content, and you don't have to go very deep to get to really nice stuff. You know, every time we find the dry stuff, we sort of collect it up and then we try to reintegrate it so the stuff never stays dry for long. Usually just one, you know, feeding cycle, and then it goes back into service. But I believe that's it. So before I go, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.